Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
They told me they were exhausted and needed rest, that it had been a long week, and they would catch the next one, that I should not take it personally because family always supports family even when they cannot physically be there. And I nodded, because I've learned that in my family you reward any scrap of consideration with silence. Yet while I was packing my notes and rehearsing my opening in the mirror to keep my voice steady and my hands from shaking, my phone buzzed with a new post, then another. A neat carousel of smiling faces and inside jokes and clinking glasses from a cute little brunch I was not invited to, complete with a caption about quality time and priorities, and how you have to show up for the people you love. And I stood there staring at the screen thinking, so that is what needing rest looks like. I did not comment, and I did not call, because I have learned that if I give them anger they will make it about my tone, and if I give them hurt they will make it about my sensitivity, so I swallowed it whole and let it burn. And I reminded myself that debate is the one arena where I do not have to wait for anyone to pick me, where I can show up alone and it still counts, where the judges are not my mother keeping score for who booked the restaurant, or my father calculating which child will make him look more put together at the office, or my sister measuring each moment against whether it centers her, and if it does not then it is somehow selfish that it centers me. I would like to tell you I was surprised, but you know the truth before I say it, because if you grew up in a family where attention is a limited resource then you understand the little economics of it, how there are always these small trades that never look like trades. A ride here, a favor there, a post shared, a story liked, a photo commented on, and then when it is your turn and you ask for something that is not even a favor, just presence, just an hour in a folding chair while I argue my case, they tell you they are tired and you are old enough to understand, and you do understand, but you understand the wrong thing, which is that you do not rank. So I made a choice that I am not pretending was noble, only useful. I kept my mouth shut, I muted the family group thread so I would not watch the likes roll in under that brunch photo. And I spent the rest of the afternoon turning the knot in my stomach into scaffolding, telling myself that every time I want to refresh their page I will instead run my rebuttal. Every time I want to send a sarcastic heart reaction I will instead time my pauses. Every time I want to text my sister and ask her if the pancakes tasted like betrayal I will instead lock in on the logic chain I kept breaking during practice and fix the weak link until it is tight enough to hold my weight. That sounds clean. It was not clean, because it is hard to turn hurt into fuel without choking on the fumes, and I kept catching myself thinking about the tiny things that only matter because they carry the bigger thing. Like how the caption mentioned the restaurant by name and the reservation time, which meant this was planned while I was begging them last week to save the date, and how one of my aunt's comments said that she wished I could have joined, a dig dressed as a wish, because she knows I would have joined if I had been asked, and she knows I was not, and this is the part that has followed me my whole life, the part where they stage a scene and leave me off camera then tell me I am imagining it, as if the crop is an accident and not the point. When my coach checked in that evening and asked if I was okay, I told her I was fine because I did not want to bring that mess into the space where I am building something that belongs to me, and I heard myself say it and liked the sound of it, belongs to me. So I made one tiny move that was mine alone and that no one could argue with, a move that looked like nothing but felt like the first brick in a new wall. I opened my calendar and removed family from the shared access they had insisted on years ago so they could be in the loop, because I am done sending reminders into a vacuum and pretending the silence is neutral. And I told myself that if they want to know where I will be, they can ask like people who care, not monitor like people who manage. That was not a speech, and it was not a scene, and it did not satisfy the petty part of me that wanted to reply under the brunch photo with a cheerful line about how rest seems delicious with mimosas, but it did something steadier. It gave me a little space to hear my own voice again, the one that does not need permission to be loud, and in that space I wrote a single sentence at the bottom of my notes where only I could see it, a sentence that I promised myself I would use if I earned the right to say it, because words matter more when they are paid for in effort and not thrown like a plate in a kitchen fight, and the sentence was simple and honest and sharp enough to cut without blood. For those who could not show up, do not pretend to care now. I closed my laptop, I set 2 alarms, and I told myself I would not give them another thought until the podium, which I knew was a lie, but I chose it anyway, because sometimes choosing the lie that keeps you moving is the only way to get to the truth. And while I lay there rehearsing the opening in my head and trying not to picture the syrup shining on their plates, my phone lit up with my sister's name and a short message that said, "Do not make this bigger than it is," which is when I realized. She already knew it was bigger than she wanted it to be, and I smiled in the dark and typed a reply I did not send, then put the phone face down and decided that tomorrow I would make something bigger than her comfort, and if she wanted to talk about it, she could come find me on the stage. I woke up the next morning with that same weight pressing on my chest, the kind that makes you question why you keep expecting people who have shown you, again and again, where their loyalties actually lie to somehow suddenly recognize your worth. And I made myself stop scrolling through the comments under their brunch photos because every "so happy for you guys" felt like another reminder that they were happy, but not for me, and it struck me that the only way I would ever stop feeling like the afterthought in my own family was if I stopped waiting for them to fix it and started deciding how much space they would be allowed to take up in the parts of my life that mattered. I poured all of that into preparation, rehearsing lines with a sharpness I had not accessed before, not because I wanted to be perfect for the judges, but because I wanted to prove to myself that no matter how many times I was sidelined or dismissed, I could still stand on my own and deliver something undeniable. Debate had always been my space of escape, the place where logic outweighed favoritism and where performance was judged by what you said and how you defended it, not by how loudly your sister could complain about being tired or how convincingly my mother could sigh about her back hurting after sitting on hard chairs. I kept remembering how, in the past, when my brother's soccer team made the playoffs, the entire family rearranged schedules, canceled plans, and filled the bleachers in matching shirts like it was the Super Bowl, while when I had won a state qualifier, my parents offered a polite congratulations at dinner and quickly pivoted to discussing whether Jenna should dye her hair before prom. Those little dismissals, stacked year after year, had formed a kind of silent ledger in my head, and I realized that I had always been trying to balance it, but the truth is they never intended for it to balance. Because in their version of family economics, my role was to absorb the leftovers and act grateful. When Jenna came into the kitchen the night before finals, sipping from her oversized tumbler like she had just returned from a marathon of errands when in reality she had spent the afternoon showing off brunch pictures to her friends, she gave me this smirk and said, "Don't take it too personally, it's just a debate, nobody remembers these things in the long run." I almost laughed out loud at how effortlessly she could strip the meaning from something that had taken me months of preparation and years of discipline, but I bit my tongue because I realized that arguing with her now would waste energy I needed to save for tomorrow. And besides, if she wanted to believe that what I was doing was insignificant, then my victory would sting all the more when it proved her wrong in a way she could not talk over. I kept my response measured, a quiet "we'll see," and she raised her eyebrows like I was being dramatic, then walked off with the kind of careless confidence you can only have when you've been told your whole life that your existence alone is enough to be celebrated. In that moment, though, I made a decision that hardened everything inside me. I would not let her define the terms anymore. I would not measure my achievement against her indifference, and I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Instead, I would make tomorrow about me and only me, and whatever came out of it would not be diluted by whether my family decided it was convenient to notice. That night, as I spread my notes out across the bed and ran through my points one last time, I felt something shift from raw anger into focus. Every time my voice wavered, I imagined Jenna's dismissive tone and pushed through it, making my delivery firmer. Every time I lost my place, I pictured the brunch photos and reined myself back in, sharpening my recall. And every time fatigue tempted me to close my notebook, I thought of the way my father had shrugged when I told him about the finals, as if this milestone of mine was just another calendar entry competing with a nap. And I let that sting fuel another round of practice until the words flowed without hesitation. By the time I finally closed my eyes, I knew two things for certain. Tomorrow I was going to deliver the best performance I had ever managed, and when the spotlight turned my way, I was going to seize the chance to say something that would pierce right through their excuses. I did not know exactly how the words would come out, but I had a line written at the bottom of my notes like a secret weapon, one sentence that carried all the frustration of being overlooked, dismissed, and excluded. And as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I repeated it in my head like a promise. For those who could not show up, do not pretend to care now. Walking into that auditorium felt like carrying every slight, every shrug, and every dismissal on my shoulders, yet instead of weighing me down it gave me a strange kind of steel, because I kept telling myself that if they were not here to watch me, then I would make sure they still heard me whether they wanted to or not, and that thought made me breathe deeper, stand taller, and focus in a way I had never managed before. The rows were filled with parents cheering for their kids, classmates whispering encouragement, coaches pacing with nervous energy, and for a moment I let myself absorb that this was what showing up looked like, that this was what care meant. And while part of me wished my family could finally understand it, the louder part decided I did not need them to, because the evidence of who they were was already stamped across their brunch photos, and the evidence of who I was about to become would be sealed in how I performed here. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium and felt the silence of the room fold around me, a silence that used to terrify me, but that day felt like space being cleared for me to exist. And I dove into my opening line with a steadiness that surprised even me. The arguments I had built, the hours I had practiced, the moments of doubt I had crushed the night before, they all lined up neatly like soldiers waiting for my command, and for the first time I was not just reciting, I was owning it. Every rebuttal felt like a release of tension that had been simmering for years. Every carefully structured point felt like proof that I was not the background character they treated me as. And every pause I let hang in the air felt like an invitation for the audience to see me fully, to recognize me as someone who deserved to be heard. The other team was strong, I will not deny that, and under different circumstances they might have shaken me, but with every word they threw my way I remembered the indifference on Jenna's face when she told me it was just a debate. And that memory stiffened my spine and sharpened my tongue until I countered them with precision, point by point, dismantling their case not with arrogance, but with the clarity of someone who had already fought harder battles just to be seen at her own dinner table. By the time I finished my closing, I felt a heat inside my chest that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with release, as though I had finally spoken not just the case, but also the years of quiet resentment that had built up inside me. When the judges conferred and the announcement came, naming me the winner, the applause rose like a wave I had been waiting my whole life to ride, and I let it wash over me without flinching. Because this time it was not going to be minimized or redirected or turned into a joke at my expense. I had earned it, and nobody could take it from me. That was when I saw the camera, a live stream being broadcast so that families and friends could watch from anywhere, and I remembered the line I had scribbled at the bottom of my notes, the one I had promised myself I would use if I had the chance. My coach gave me a nod to step up and say a few words, and I knew this was the moment. I leaned into the microphone, steady and deliberate, and said, "For those who could not show up, do not pretend to care now." I let it hang there, unflinching, unsoftened, because it was not just a sentence, it was a verdict. The room murmured, some people looked surprised, a few clapped harder, and I could feel the ripples moving outward as if I had just pulled the veil off something most people prefer to leave unspoken. It was not dramatic for the sake of theater, it was the truth, and I had finally said it aloud where they could not crop me out. What I did not expect was the message waiting for me as I stepped down from the stage. A friend shoved her phone into my hand, and there on the live stream chat was Jenna's name, the comment already deleted but still screenshotted by someone faster, a single line that read, "Wow, ungrateful much?" I stared at it, felt the chill of recognition, and then noticed another text buzzing in, this one directly from her, telling me to stop embarrassing the family. At that moment, I realized the speech had hit exactly where I wanted it to, because if she was rattled enough to lash out, then she was rattled enough to know the truth. I walked out of that auditorium into the evening air, trophy in hand, but it was not the medal that mattered. It was the look I knew my family would have when they saw the replay. The sudden shift from confidence that they could downplay me forever to the dawning realization that I had spoken in a place they could not control. And as I checked my phone one more time, I saw the family group chat go silent. No congratulations, no emojis, no hollow words, just a void where their approval was supposed to live. It almost felt satisfying until the notification popped up from Jenna again, this time saying only, "We'll talk about this later," and for the first time I wondered whether the fight I had just started was only beginning. The hours after the debate did not feel like a victory lap, at least not in the way you imagine when you spend weeks preparing for something and finally come out on top, because instead of basking in the glow of winning and feeling proud of myself, I found my phone buzzing so violently that it felt like the trophy in my bag was shaking along with it, and every time I looked there was another message in the family group chat where my parents and sister were volleying blame at me as if my speech had been some kind of calculated attack meant to humiliate them personally, when in reality it had been the only honest thing I could have said after years of watching them skip, excuse, and deflect every time I needed even the smallest acknowledgement. My father's message came first, terse and commanding, asking why I had felt the need to air private family matters in public, as if my disappointment was some dirty laundry I should have folded in silence. Then my mother chimed in, trying to play the role of mediator while still accusing me of being dramatic, telling me that I had hurt feelings and that I owed the family an apology for choosing such a harsh moment to vent. I read their words and could almost hear their voices layered over them, the clipped tone of my father, the stylized condescension of my mother. And it made me laugh bitterly because what they considered an apology-worthy outburst had really been nothing more than a single sentence, delivered calmly, without insults or theatrics. Yet that alone was enough to puncture the carefully constructed image they put on display for everyone else, the image where we were united, supportive, and proud of each other. I decided not to answer immediately, because I knew that if I fired back in the heat of it, they would twist my words the way they always did, so instead I let the chat run wild, watching my sister Jenna step into the spotlight of the conversation with her trademark blend of self-righteousness and half-truths. She wrote that she was embarrassed, that people had messaged her asking what I meant, that she felt blindsided and betrayed, as if my speech had been a knife aimed at her. Personally, when all I had really done was put words to something she knew was true but refused to acknowledge that they had not been there, that their absence spoke louder than their excuses, and that no post or brunch photo could disguise it. When I finally responded, I did it in one long message that pulled no punches, listing the years of being ignored, of being brushed aside, of being told to be understanding, while the spotlight was always trained on someone else. I told them that their absence had not just been about the debate, that it had been about every time they chose convenience over commitment, every time they made me feel like the backup plan in a family where hierarchy was clear and immovable, and that my sentence had not been meant to humiliate, but to free me from pretending it did not matter. I expected anger in response, and I got it. My father accusing me of rewriting history, my mother saying I was too sensitive, and Jenna, of course, throwing out passive-aggressive one-liners about how ungrateful I was for everything they had supposedly done for me. What none of them realized, though, was that I was done playing their game of denial, and the more they raged, the more certain I became that I had finally shifted the balance. Later that evening, as I tried to unwind, I noticed my phone lighting up with notifications from people I had not spoken to in months, friends from high school, distant cousins, even a former teacher, all telling me that they had seen the clip of my speech and that it had resonated with them. Some said it gave them chills, others said it reminded them of times they had been dismissed or undervalued, and a few just wrote a simple, "Thank you." For the first time, I understood that the line had reached far beyond my family, that in speaking my truth I had touched something wider, something that belonged to anyone who had ever been pushed to the margins. But instead of celebrating that, I felt a tightening sense that my family would see this ripple not as a victory, but as an attack, and I knew they would not let it go quietly. The confirmation of that came quickly, when Jenna posted a vague status online about toxic relatives who weaponize public platforms to get attention, clearly aimed at me, though never naming me directly. She got her predictable flood of sympathy from friends who had no idea what had actually happened, comments full of "ignore the haters" and "you don't owe anyone anything," and though part of me wanted to call her out, another part relished the irony. Because the very thing she accused me of, making a spectacle, was exactly what she was doing now, except she was doing it from the safety of her curated audience, while I had chosen to do it on a stage where accountability was real. By the time night settled in, the tension was unbearable, and though I told myself I would not check again, I found myself staring out the window when I saw headlights sweep across the driveway and then linger too long, the engine cutting, but the car not moving. When I stepped closer, I recognized the outline of Jenna's car, parked in the shadows, sitting there as if she could not decide whether to come inside or wait me out. The house was quiet, my parents had gone to bed, and yet there she was, alone in the dark, and I knew this was not just about an argument anymore, it was about something heavier, something that could not be typed out in group chats or masked in brunch photos, something that she needed to say face to face. I felt my stomach clench as I watched her silhouette shift in the driver's seat, and in that moment, I understood that the war I thought I had ended with my sentence on stage had only opened its next front, and it was waiting for me just a few steps away in the parking lot. She was waiting in the car with the engine off and the window cracked just enough for her voice to slip out like it was supposed to sound casual, except nothing about Jenna sitting alone in the dark outside our house felt casual. And when I opened the passenger door and slid in without asking permission, she tried to start with small talk, which I shut down by telling her that if she had something to say it should be said without the usual sugar, because I did not have the appetite or the patience for it anymore, and that was when she reached into her tote and pulled out a printed statement with my name at the bottom. A neat little paragraph full of polite regret and careful phrasing that boiled down to me walking back what I had said on stage and promising to be more considerate of people's limitations next time. And before I even finished reading, I recognized my father's vocabulary and my mother's tone, which meant this was not a conversation but an errand. She told me that Dad had a reputation to protect and Mom had already fielded calls from relatives who felt blindsided by my words, that the school administration might get nervous because public shaming can look like a policy issue if the wrong person decides to make it one, and that we could avoid all of that if I posted this apology tonight, tagged the debate team, and kept the comments turned off for a few days until it all blew over. She said it quickly, like she wanted to outrun my reaction, then added the part she thought would hook me, which was that if I did this, Dad would make some calls and smooth things out with the district coordinator about an upcoming invitational I had been eyeing. A tidy little reminder that in our family help always came with a string, and that string always tightened around my throat. I told her I was not signing anything, and when she rolled her eyes and called me stubborn, I said no, not stubborn, just done, then handed the paper back and explained that what I said on stage was not reckless or cruel, it was measured and earned. And the reason it stung was because it was true. I told her that if she wanted me to protect the image, then she should have protected the reality, and that if they were worried about administrators or coordinators, they could relax, because earlier that evening I had already sent a note to the principal and the activities director, a calm, concise email that explained I had spoken in general terms, named no one, targeted no one, and that my intent was to affirm the value of showing up rather than to weaponize a platform, and I included the full clip so they could judge for themselves, not the screenshot versions that gossip tends to amplify. And within an hour the activities director had replied that he appreciated the clarity and considered the matter closed. Jenna stared at me like I had reached across the console and knocked the wind out of her, then shifted tactics and said I had humiliated Mom, that I should at least fix the optics for her, and I told her I had already done the only fix I owed anyone, because I had taken the prize money and started a small fund with the alumni office called the Show Up Fund, a no-drama, no-names micro-grant for students whose families could not or would not attend, whether that meant a rideshare to an event, a bus pass, or a quiet dinner for one afterward so the wind did not land in an empty house, and that the first donation came from my old English teacher who had been in the audience and sent me a message that said she had waited years to hear a student say out loud what so many kids carry alone, and if my family wanted to contribute they were welcome. But their contribution would not buy them a veto on my voice. She said I was making enemies I did not need, and I said I was making boundaries I should have set a long time ago. She said people would talk, and I said people were already talking. The difference was that now I had chosen the topic. She said Dad would be furious in the morning, and I said then he could be furious with the activities director too, because the adult in charge had decided there was nothing to punish. She tried one last angle and told me she had a copy of the stream chat where I looked mean, and I nodded and told her I had a copy of her ungrateful much comment with the timestamp and the deletion, and that I had no intention of posting it publicly unless the smearing continued, because I did not want to hurt her. But I would not let her dirty my name to clean hers. That was when she broke, not in some cinematic collapse, but in the way a person's voice thins when the script runs out, and she said the part she had not planned to say, which was that she had liked being the one everyone fussed over. That she had been terrified of what would happen if I stopped accepting my place, and that brunch had not been a thoughtless coincidence, but a choice she had pushed, because she wanted to keep the spotlight and knew that if they showed up for me this time it might turn, and hearing her admit it did not make me feel triumphant or compassionate. It just made everything suddenly simple, because you cannot negotiate with a person who is asking you to be small so they can feel big. I told her I would not be small anymore, that I would not apologize, that I would not perform family unity on command, and that if she wanted a path back to me it would start with honesty and continue with behavior, not captions. I opened the door to leave, then paused and gave her the only concession I was willing to offer, which was a promise that I would keep her confession between us if she stopped the vague posts and told Mom and Dad to stop sending me drafts of my own voice. She pressed her hands to the steering wheel and whispered that I did not understand what I had started, that there were conversations happening I could not see, and I said she was right, there always had been, which was why I had finally started a few of my own. I walked away without looking back, went inside, and scheduled a post that was not an apology but a thank you to my coach, to the teachers who had sat in those hard chairs, to the classmates who had yelled my name when the announcement came, and to every person who had ever stood up alone and still stood tall, and I ended it with the same line I had used on stage, because I meant it then, and I meant it now, a line that would follow me into whatever came next. For those who could not show up, do not pretend to care now. The house stayed quiet, my phone stopped trembling, and even with the next battle humming somewhere out of sight, I could feel the balance tilt for good, because this time the final move had been mine.